Ooh, 27, here we go.
Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for joining us. We're gonna wait just to hear a minute or two to get a couple more folks joining us, and then we will get started. Okay, seeing that our numbers are looking good, I'm going to go ahead and get started kicking things off. So, good afternoon, everybody, and a warm welcome to SANDAG's ADU regional training. As the SANDAG project manager for our Housing Acceleration Program Local Jurisdiction Technical Assistance, or our HAP-TA program, I'm really excited to kick off this training on behalf of our entire project team. Before getting started, I wanted to start off by extending a huge thank you to our whole project team, all of our speakers and all of our presenters today who put in a ton of time to develop this content and sharing their time to share all of their insights and experiences with you today regarding ADUs. Over the next 2 hours, I highly encourage everybody to ask questions and participate in our discussions, especially during our roundtable portion of this training, which you'll hear more about in just a moment. Your contributions and your input today will really make the most of this opportunity and this training and really be able to learn and collaborate with all of you and with all of our presenters, speakers, and our experienced project team. I also wanted to cover just a couple housekeeping items before I pass it off to Matt from Ascent, who really leads our project team, and we'll take you through the entirety of our presentation. So first, if you have questions throughout kind of the first portion of this training, which is more presentations heavy, please go ahead and put them in the chat. Later on in the training, we'll have an opportunity for an open panel roundtable discussion, and our panelists and speakers can address your questions then. And secondly, as a reminder, we are going to be recording this training, and we will be sharing out the presentation, the training recording, and some of the other supporting materials that you'll be seeing today. I'll send all of that out in a follow-up email, so be on the lookout for that after this training. And so with that, I'm going to pass it off to Matt to take you through the rest of this training.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. Just to give you a little more information about what to expect, we're going to be starting with a group of presentations covering an overview of ADUs, discussing the legislative context, providing an overview of a typical or common permitting process. We will also be having a presentation module on ADUs and RENA. And then we'll get into a roundtable discussion for the conclusion of this presentation. So we do have a lot to cover. We're going to try and get all of this information to you as clearly as we can in a succinct manner. But we do have a lot to cover and want to get through what we have before we open it up for discussion. So first, I'm going to start with introductions to our speakers today who will be presenting. Carrie is going to be playing a role today and helping facilitate the meeting. We also have Thomas DeFranco from SANDAG, who's going to be presenting later in the presentation. I will be covering a couple sections. Again, I'm Matt Geldman from Ascent. We are joined by Ian Dunn from Open Scope Studio, who's going to be taking our first module to really introduce ADUs and the different types of ADUs. We also have Aaron LaParolari from Goldfarb and Littman, who's going to be talking about legislative context and state law for ADUs. We also have Adam Pisarkowitz from Civic Solutions, who's going to be talking about some of the work we've done under the SANDAG HAP TA program for jurisdictions related to ADUs and developing ADU handbooks as we talk about the permitting process. And lastly, we will be joined as well, or we are joined by Celeste Goyer from the Casita Coalition, who's going to be talking about everything I think we're going to be covering, but from a little bit of a different perspective, sharing experiences from outside of the San Diego region, as well as from other places in the state, and kind of talking about some of the recent laws and why they're important for ADUs and housing in the state. So that's the overview of our speakers and our topics today. We will get into it now. So let's keep going. Next slide, please. So this slide says why ADUs. I will get to that, but also want to talk about why we are even having this workshop at all. We've been supporting this team, SANDAG, and all of the local jurisdictions for over a year. And we've received quite a number of questions about ADUs during that time. Things about interpretations of government code, promoting affordability, doing handbooks, as I mentioned before. And so we really wanted to take this opportunity to pull it all together and talk about ADUs, because they are such an important role in housing, increasing housing production in the region, and addressing the housing crisis. So these are all, ADUs are in, I think, every jurisdiction's housing element and play a big role in RENA production and capacity. And so we wanted to talk about best practices, constraints, and issues that everyone in the region is dealing with that are common or perhaps unique, and learn from each other about how to increase ADU production and make it easier and lower cost to build ADUs. So why ADUs? They're easy housing solution in the grand scheme of things. Don't require upzoning significantly. Not to say they're not controversial. They are in a lot of cases. So, but we rely on them as a tool for housing production as well. So they also have the opportunity for lower construction costs. They're smaller in size, so that automatically has less construction costs, but a lot of the pre-approved and even prefabricated ADUs are also driving down construction costs. So there's also the potential and benefits of rental income that can come from ADUs, depending on their ultimate use. And sometimes that's flexible and can change within a given year. And often we see these as multi-generational housing solutions as well. So a lot of benefits to ADUs. And again, we just wanted to take some time to talk about all of the opportunities they present for housing in the region and discuss some of the challenges so we can address them and find some common ground and solutions. So with that, I am going to turn it over to Ian, who's going to talk more about what ADUs are and the different types of ADUs.
Great. Thank you, Matt. So the ADUs that we most commonly associate with the building type are probably those backyard cottages. So those typically related to a single family dwelling unit, primarily a single family home on a single parcel, right? So typically that's an ADU or a rear yard cottage. I'm going to look at a couple of different configurations with you, built on the site of an existing home, but I do want to point out that they can be proposed as part of a proposed development of a single family home with an ADU. The certificate of occupancy for the ADU will be contingent on the certificate of occupancy for the new home, but they can be developed together at the same time concurrently. Probably less of an issue for the people in the roundtable here, but it's important to understand that the two codes that are typically regulating ADUs are the local planning codes, the ordinances constructed by the local city and county, and then the overriding state building code. There are very, very few exceptions for ADU construction in the state building code, and most of the ADU ordinances developed at the state and local levels are adaptations and revisions to the local planning codes. I'll talk about some of the the very few exceptions in the building code, but it pretty much comes down to fire sprinklers. Everything else in terms of plumbing, electrical, fire safety still apply to ADUs, regardless of the configurations. Paul, thanks. Next. Great. I think that was my next slide. So next. Great. So the 4 types that I'm going to review as part of the existing single family homes are the junior ADUs, the garage conversions, the freestanding, and then the additions. And then I have a couple of case studies with the infill ADUs at multifamily developments, and I can touch briefly on the freestanding ADUs that are allowed at multifamily. Next slide. Great. So the first type are the junior ADUs, sometimes abbreviated as JDUs or JADUs. You'll hear all sorts of monikers for them. The essential kind of criteria for these is that they are located inside an existing primary residence. So there's no additional square footage added, and they aren't built in an existing accessory building. So they're already contained inside the existing envelope. They're limited to 500 square feet. And although they have to have their own kitchenette, they are allowed to share a bathroom, and they are allowed to share utilities with the primary residence. They do have to have their own independent entry, but they are also allowed to have a shared doorway into the primary residence. So very specific in the use types that are imagined with JDUs, whether it's extended family or caretaker situation, but that is generally how the ordinances have been drafted to accommodate these type of very specific ADUs. The only other caveat on them is that they really do, they have an owner occupancy requirement. So one of those units, either the JDU or the existing home, do have to be occupied by one of the registered owners of the property. Next. So just a couple of examples. The one on the right, maybe in particular, is from Portland, but it's very common to have unfinished basements up there, and very common in cities where basements are typical to find JDUs built into these basements. The other common situation is to take a primary bedroom that might already have its own bathroom and convert that into a JDU by adding a small kitchenette and a separate exterior entrance. Thanks. So the next type associated with the single family home is the conversion of an existing accessory building. Most commonly a freestanding garage, but it really could be anything. It could be a workshop, it could be a large shed that's already on the property. The important kind of carve out for these is that the existing footprint of that accessory building can be maintained regardless of its setbacks. So even if this garage is on the property line and it's allowed to be converted within the existing footprint into an ADU, into a separate unit. It does kind of come with all of the constraints or limitations imposed on other ADUs, and that it will likely have to have its own utility connections, does have to have its own kitchen and bathroom. It has to really function as an independent unit, not as attached, not as an extension really of the primary home like the junior ADUs do. And then some nice examples of, I believe all of these are garages that were converted over to separate units. They're all detached freestanding units, so they have open space all around. They're in no way connected to the existing home, and all have been converted into units. So the kind of most typical, I think, what people imagine an ADU is the backyard cottage. Those are regulated up at the state level as needing to be at least, well, no closer than 4 feet to the property line. At least that's kind of the maximum minimum that local jurisdictions are allowed to adopt. That's from the side and the rear property lines. They set a height limit of 16 feet currently in state law, and they've recently upped that to 18 feet if you're within a half mile of transit. I think, though more commonly, we do find many jurisdictions adjust that up to 20, 22 feet, sometimes 24 feet, if that additional height is necessary and important to allowing the homeowner to put a pitched roof on that might better coordinate with their existing home or the design guidelines that are for that development. So typically not not without reference to the pitched height, to the pitched roof, but we do see a lot of height increases simply related to allowing some different massings of the ADUs. State law is also does not dictate building separation, but we frequently find local ordinances place guidelines or sometimes requirements on building separation. I'm going to touch more on this later along in the slides, but that is an important thing for local jurisdictions to understand, that although state law doesn't mandate that, it is important guidance for homeowners and designers and builders to understand. Just a couple of examples. There are many out there of new freestanding ADUs become very popular over the last few years. Thanks. So the last type of single-family home ADUs are new units that are constructed into additions onto the existing home. These carry many of the same limitations as the other ADUs we visited. They have to have an independent entrance. These, if they're built in as an addition, aren't allowed to have a connecting door to the existing unit. They do have to have their own utility connections, their own addressing, their own mail service, these sorts of things. The one relaxation is really in the height of the unit, where if you're constructing it as an addition to a single family home, you're allowed to go up to 25 feet or to match the existing residence. So again, there's some understanding in the code. They're trying to encourage jurisdictions to be able to match roof lines and the aesthetics and the massing of the existing housing stock. Okay. And just a couple of examples, again, of ADUs, neither of which really bump into the height issue, but nonetheless built as additions to the existing homes. Okay, so with the multifamily developments, there is a specific section of the state ordinances that address adding units and densifying existing multifamily developments. So probably the most kind of clearly understood one is that you're allowed to add a duplex, two freestanding units to an existing apartment complex into some open space that is unused on the site. Those units generally have the same limitations in terms of setbacks and height limits and the requirement for utilities and these sorts of things as the single family freestanding units do. So they're a pretty well-known entity in terms of understanding what the rules and requirements are. The other one that's a little bit more difficult for a lot of people to get their head around are the units that are actually added into the existing unused spaces of apartment buildings. So you can add up to 25% of the existing unit count into the unused non-residential spaces of buildings. You're not permitted to carve space out of existing units to create new ones, but you can use parking garages, storage rooms, common rooms, leasing offices, these sorts of non-residential uses. Just a couple of case studies, because sometimes it can be hard to imagine how and where those might go in. So this is a project in Pacifica. It's existing 172 unit suburban development, 2 stories of residential over top of tuck under parking. You can see in that site plan below, all of the pinkish purple units are existing buildings following this exact model of tuck under parking with 2 stories of residential. We placed 42 affordable units into those orange bands, replacing the tuck under parking with units. So this project is currently under construction. You can kind of see the before condition where we were able to empty out that tuck under parking, do seismic upgrades, replace all the utilities in the existing building, and then insert 42 studio and 1-bedroom units into those spaces. And then eventually, construction is nearing completion, hopefully get some landscape and actually create amenities and usable open space for not only the residents of the new units, but for the project as a whole. The other type of multifamily development ADUs we're seeing and doing more and more of are the podium construction. This was a building type really came on strong in the 80s and 90s across the state, where you have a concrete parking garage, 1 or 2 stories, and then anywhere from 3, 4, 5 stories of wood frame residential over top of that. We're now able to repurpose unused portions of the parking garage and place units around the perimeter. So this is a project in Emeryville. You can see the before photo on the left, a fairly typical, it was bar grading to provide open ventilation and security for the parking garage. We've placed 15 1- and 2-bedroom units around the perimeter of 4 different parking garages. Again, adding small patios and walkways that connect to the existing site circulation system, and then re-landscaping those buffers to provide the privacy of the bedrooms and really integrate the new units and the whole base of the building back into the existing project above. So I wanted to run through just a handful of constraints as I wrap up here. These are, I think this is better kind of bracketed as questions that commonly come up from homeowners that we deal with. It can be very helpful for jurisdictions to be able to clarify some of these questions up front for people that are considering adding ADUs, particularly to the single family residents. So ADUs may not be used for short-term rental services, such as Airbnb and VRBO. Any leases on ADUs have to be in excess of 30 days. And then I think we're going to speak more on AB 1033 later, but unless the local jurisdiction has specifically adopted rules in compliance with 1033, the ADUs cannot be sold separately. No condominium maps or anything like that can be generated with an ADU project. Gonna kind of pick it up here a little bit. Local jurisdictions can place requirements on the exterior stylings of new ADUs. So in terms of roof shape, roof materials, exterior colors, and exterior finish materials, all of those can be placed into ADU guidelines in the ordinance, as long as they're not excluding and prohibiting the development of ADUs in themselves. Generally, the independent utility connections, except for the junior ADUs, as I mentioned, are required. That frequently trips people up. But utility connections, generally electricity, water, and sewer, are required for new ADU developments. And then another little wrinkle that sometimes surprises people is that their HOA, if they're in one in their development, does have the right to review ADU proposals. And similarly to the jurisdiction with design styling, HOAs can impose guidelines and restrictions on screening for parking and exterior colors and materials. They cannot, however, prohibit de facto the development of an ADU in an HOA controlled development. Oh, parking always comes up. So so the ordinance at the state level is written that that an off-site parking space is required for a new ADU. The exceptions are if you're within a half-mile walking distance of a transit stop, or that you're constructing that ADU as a conversion or a junior ADU inside the existing building, and or you're replacing a parking space with a new unit, in which case that parking is not required to be replaced. Okay. I think we will move on here. So some common gaps that we see kind of time and time again that come up that it's very helpful for local jurisdictions to be able to address in their resources. Building separation, as I noted earlier, make sure it's clear what the requirements are, first of all, from the existing buildings, whether you're measuring that from the wall surface or the roof eave, whether there's a different separation required from an entry door or a bedroom window, these sorts of use cases inside the floor plan that might dictate different building separations. ADUs typically have small pieces of mechanical equipment, usually just a small kind of suitcase size condenser that might accompany the unit. It's very helpful to understand the local requirements for where those can be placed. Are they allowed to be in the setback? Is there an additional setback around the corner from the ADU? If they're visible from the street, do they require screening? These sorts of things that define the parameters of how mechanical units can be placed around the ADU. Similarly, any guidance you can provide homeowners, builders, and designers with clarifying what the utility connections are going to be and how those are best coordinated is helpful, whether that's a checklist or a set of contacts with the local utility companies. That's very helpful. Similarly, understanding how addressing works, how trash is both picked up and where trash containers can be kept. These sorts of smaller details on site infrastructure is very helpful to explain to homeowners in resources that are provided. And then many jurisdictions, sorry, Paul, I had one more. Many jurisdictions have triggers for when geotechnical reports are required, when grading plans are required, when landscape or irrigation plans are required. It's sometimes that information is really only included in the kind of umbrella application, building permit application requirements. It's very helpful to be able to point specific ADU projects towards those triggers so that they understand whether they'll require surveys and other reports aside from the site. Thank you. All right, I will wrap up. Thank you very much.
All right, so now we're going to go through the legislative context for ADUs to understand what the statute requires of local agencies, so you can confidently look at the statutes, and to also understand where local agencies have some discretion and what local agencies can or should adopt. So this slide has the relevant statutes. This year, there weren't a lot of mandatory changes, but except for the prohibition against requiring owner occupancy for ADUs. Previously, that was going to expire in 2025, but now you cannot adopt owner occupancy requirement as of 2025. But owner occupancy is still required for JADUs. And the other big change this year that we're going to discuss in more detail in a few slides is the requirement of local agencies to adopt a pre-approval program for ADUs, and the option for local agencies to adopt an ordinance to allow for the separate conveyance of ADUs from the primary dwelling. But this slide gives you the relevant statutory provisions. So the first one that's listed prohibits CC&Rs from prohibiting or unreasonably restricting the construction or use of ADUs on single-family properties. So there can't be any private restrictions or other restrictions on a property that would prohibit the construction of ADUs. And then the second one listed on this slide prohibits local ordinances from unreasonably restricting the development of ADUs. The third set, 65852.2 and 0.22, these are probably the most referenced statutes, and they have to do broadly with ADUs and JADUs. The number and type of ADU or JADUs allow per site objective standards that can be imposed. It prohibits discretionary review by local agencies for ADUs and JADUs, imposes a 60-day timeline for review. And effective this week, there are changes to these two sections, and we're going to discuss that in a couple of slides as well. For ADUs that are already developed but unpermitted, 65852.23 restricts when a local agency can deny a permit to legalize the ADU if the ADU was constructed before 2018. So basically, the permit can only be denied if the local agency finds that the ADU violates some requirement which is necessary to correct in order to protect the health and safety of the public or the occupants. We'll discuss the subdivision option later. This is another, it's not a subdivision, but it's another conveyance section, another section related to conveyance. 65852.26 allows for properties with an ADU to be owned by tenants in common. So it imposes some requirements for how that property can be owned. 65852.27 requires local agencies to adopt a pre-approved ADU program by January 1st, 2025. We're going to discuss what that means in a few slides. And then we have Public Resource Code section, which allows for the adoption or exempts the adoption of the ADU ordinance from requirements of the California Environmental Quality Act. And finally, the Health and Safety Code section allows owners of ADUs that are developed before 2020 or before the local jurisdiction had a compliant ADU ordinance when the ADU was developed to request a delay in building standard enforcement for 5 years unless the correction of the issue is necessary to protect health and safety. Okay, next slide. All right, so what can cities regulate now that there are so many requirements under state law? So the first thing we always like to highlight is there is some room for regulation, but under 65852.2e, there are specific ADUs listed, ADUs developed within the space of a single family home or accessory structure, detached ADUs up to 800 square feet, ADUs within unhabitable space in a multifamily structure, and ADUs, detached ADUs on a multifamily structure. The interpretation of HCD of this section is that those ADUs do not have to follow any local development or design standards. And HCD has the state HCD has a guideline book. I think the last time one was updated was July 2022. So it's good to look at that because HCD does review local ADU ordinances and may require or request revisions to the ordinance if they disagree with the interpretation. So when you can impose design or development standards, they have to be objective. So you have to make sure that they sound as objective as possible. That can be hard with architectural design, but some people use identical or have a list of design standards and say you need to select 3 of these out of 3 of 5 of these standards and have them be identical to the primary dwelling, for example. Front yard setbacks, that's pretty easy to have objective since it's quantitative, same as size. But there is a maximum, minimum, maximum. You can't require a size less than 850 square feet or 1,000 square feet, depending on the number of bedrooms. But you can be more permissive than state law. And you cannot require replacement parking for ADUs that destroy the existing parking when constructing. So for example, if the ADU is developed within a garage, you cannot require replacement parking for the primary, but you can require replacement parking for the JADU. And this would really only come up if the JADU was developed within an attached garage, since you can't have a JADU within a detached accessory structure. Other things, I'll just say quickly, one other thing to consider is that if the objective standards listed in bullet 3 do not permit at least an 800 square foot ADU with 4-foot side and rear setbacks, then those standards have to be waived. Okay, we can go to the next slide. So this year, and I believe it was chaptered this week, SB 477 was adopted. This is not a substantive bill, but it does reorganize the 2 main sections that we discussed. And so you can see in this chart where you can find the new location for the ADU laws. So not just the 2 main sections, but these 4 5 sections have been renumbered in the statute. And next slide. Okay. Programs for pre-approved ADU plans. So by January 1st of next year, all local agencies are required to develop a program for the pre-approval of ADUs. How to comply? The main thing is that local agencies need to have a process for applicants to submit plans for pre-approval. And those applications follow the same standards basically as a regular application for an ADU. Once it's pre-approved, the local agency would post it on their website. And if the applicant requests for the plans to come down, the local agency has to remove it. The local agency can include ADU plans that have been approved by other agencies in the state, but you do need to get the architect's permission first, since the architect's plans are copyrighted. And if an applicant uses a detached accessory unit plan that's been pre-approved or previously approved within the building standards code rulemaking cycle, then the review period for that application would be 30 days. Generally, applications for ADUs have to be reviewed within 60 days. And it is suggested to bring an informational item to the Planning Commission or City Council to describe this process so they understand what's going on. Next slide. And SANDAG does have a technical assistance guide for AB 1332, and I pulled this from their guide. It gives you some guidance on how to adopt the plan. So develop a web page to provide an overview of your agency's pre-approved program with instructions on how to submit plans, post any pre-approved plans developed by your local agency, post pre-approved ADU plans not developed by the local agency, and bring an informational item as we discussed. So the 2 bullets in the middle, the distinction there is that some local agencies have been working with architects to develop plans. That's not necessary, but that is an option. So you will see that in, I think, the next example, or the example that we're going to show next, if we go to the next slide. So the group pulled together or selected a couple of examples of cities that have already adopted pre-approval ADU plans programs. One is the city of Santa Ana. So if you go to their website, you will see a comprehensive process for accepting ADU plans for pre-approval. And if you're using the plans, you go through an electronic plan check. Next slide. And you'll also see a number of plans posted on their website, and you'll be able to download the plans from their website. And next slide. The city of Fremont is another city that has, oh, I think we're further. You go back 1 slide. Yes, this one. Okay. The city of Fremont has a list of pre-approved designers that have plans, pre-approved plans. And on the website, they also discuss the processing options for designers. So you can go through a concurrent pre-approval while going through a specific, a site-specific plan check, or you can just do a pre-approval of the ADU application. But all pre-approved plans will still require site-specific plans, studies, and engineering. So they clarify all that on their website. So these are just 2 examples of cities that have programs in place, and they do vary a bit. Okay, now we can go to the next slide. All right, subdivisions and ADUs. So we discussed a bit earlier that previously and currently you can have tenants in common own a property with an ADU. And now under AB 1033, if a local agency opts to, they can adopt a local ordinance that allows for separate conveyance of the ADU and the primary dwelling as condominiums. And SANDAG also has technical assistance guide for AB 1033. So if the local agency adopts the ordinance, there are certain things that they have to include in the ordinance. One is that the project is going to be subject to the Davis-Sterling Act, which is a state law that regulates common interest developments, including condominiums, the Subdivision Map Act, and local subdivision ordinances. And before recording a condo plan, a safety inspection of the ADU would have to be conducted. The homeowner, the property owner, would also need to get consent from any lien holders prior to recording a map or a condo plan, and approval from any existing planned development association regarding the condo plan. Finally, the owner has to notify providers of utilities about the creation of the condos and separate conveyance. There is also a notice that the public agency will have to include in their application. That's included in the statute and is also included in the SANDAG technical assistance material.
Okay, thanks, Erin. All right, so despite the state simplifying the development standards and approvable authorities for ADUs, individual jurisdictions are still in need of further streamlining of their internal review processes for ADUs, as well as ways to educate residents on the various ADU standards and keeping up with the changes to those standards from the state. At the end of the day, ADU applications and plans still need to be reviewed for compliance, and each jurisdiction has their own unique process. So utilizing the HAP TA grant funding, SANDAG and Civic Solutions began creating ADU handbooks for individual jurisdictions. And with the goal of customer service in mind, the handbook aims to make an approachable and understandable document while balancing the technical aspects of planning, financing, permitting, building, and renting an ADU. So overall, the handbook says to residents interested in building an ADU, here's what you need to know and what you need to expect, while also providing the individual jurisdictions the opportunity to audit their own processes and begin to make further refinements internally. So with the content of the handbooks, the first half of the handbooks contain the universal ADU information, basically what Ian previously covered in his presentation. And we want to present it in a user-friendly manner intended for residents who know very little about ADUs. So this type of information includes what is an ADU, what are the state laws related to ADU planning and approvals, what are the general types of ADUs, what are those standards associated with each type, such as size, height, setbacks, parking, and then what are the potential costs associated with designing, permitting, and building an ADU? And what should I know if I intend to rent my ADU as well? So we're trying to cover all the bases for someone who's interested in building one on their property. So we're partnered with National City to create an ADU handbook for them. And as I previously stated, the application review processes are specific to each jurisdiction. So each handbook has specific steps to build or process overview sections to cover the details of those processes. So when creating the handbook for National City, their focus was on reducing the amount and types of questions they would typically get at the counter and make sure an applicant understood the role of each department in the review process, while also highlighting specific procedures that tend to be pinch points in their process. And one example of that is a new address is required to be created for a new ADU prior to approval. And it's National City's engineering department that creates the addresses. So the city wanted to make it very clear that what that part of the process is and to make residents aware of when that should occur in the process rather than it being a pinch point like it usually is. So for their handbook, we created a process flow, including the pre-application phase, design phase, permitting phase and the construct and occupy phase. And in addition, we cover specific standards such as landscaping, specific fire standards such as whether a sprinkler system might be required, the hose pull measurement that is required, and any potential sewer connections as well. And we also highlight other specific information such as the basic submittal requirements, the fee types. We include links to application guides and other resources, as well as information on the required utilities like water and power. So we really are trying to have this kind of one-stop shop for residents. But I need to point out that while the handbook does not contain every detail of each process, it points the reader in the direction of what they will need to do and what they need to know when they embark in this process. So we were also working on one with the County of San Diego and kind of comparing National City, which is a smaller, urbanized and fully built out city, to the County of San Diego, which is, large in its land area and varied. But the county has its own unique process requirements that needed to be highlighted in their handbook. And with that is their site considerations as one example. So the topography and the available infrastructure varies. So there are numerous site considerations that a resident would need to know up front prior to even really getting deep into the ADU process. So some examples of that are the fire safety requirements, the urban, wildland urban interface areas, the grading requirements, stormwater management, and septic versus sewer. And septic tends to be the biggest pinch point in their process, as septic tanks must be expanded in order to accommodate an ADU, which might not be feasible on certain properties. So the county really wants to highlight as the first step that a resident should undertake when even considering building an ADU. And in addition, the county wanted to highlight the use of their pre-approved ADU building plans as a means of reducing design expenses and expediting certain steps in the overall review and permitting process. And as with every jurisdiction, it's crucial for residents to understand the points of contact and the departments involved in the review process. So that information is provided as well. And required utilities such as water and power and their role in getting the ADU online. So overall, these handbooks are meant to distill the laws and the development standards associated with ADUs while covering each jurisdiction's processes and getting that ADU permitted, and helping residents understand the steps involved on their end in terms of designing, financing, and renting an ADU, with the hope that it increases ADU production throughout San Diego County. So.
All right, I am going to jump in here and talk a little bit about ADUs and RHNA. As I mentioned at the start of our presentation, a lot of you have already incorporated assumptions about the production and forecast of production of ADUs as part of your RHNA sites inventory. Often, there's an assumption about the affordability levels for those ADUs based on market trends at the time you were preparing your housing element, or perhaps another local or regional survey about ADU rents in your jurisdiction. Going forward, after adoption of the housing element, you're obviously required to do your annual progress report and track the production of ADUs every year. This is a little bit of a public service announcement that HCD is making it harder to carry forward the assumptions in a housing element, and is pushing jurisdictions to include more up-to-date information about market rents for affordability. Obviously, this is not for deed-restricted units that are ADUs, but for market rate units. They're really starting to ask for more information about prevailing rents for ADUs, and not just being able to carry forward the assumptions from 4 years ago into the housing element. So that is becoming an increasingly important task and a challenge. This does kind of play into no net loss laws, although ADUs are not site specific, so it's a little harder to demonstrate there's a loss in capacity there. I think it'll start to show, as we're in the middle of the planning period for the housing elements here, or approaching that, whether you're underproducing or not relative to your assumption. So just something to start thinking about as you're doing your APRs every year, and really starting to think about, a seventh cycle housing element. We really do need more data on affordability. So to that end, if you could go to the next slide, please. We do want to share an ADU affordability survey. It's a template that has been developed by ABAG and HCD, who worked closely to develop a set of questions. It's kind of gotten an informal thumbs up from HCD for tracking these types of things. Really simple survey question that can be sent to people who are getting permits at the time you issue a permit or certificate of occupancy, or perhaps annually, kind of depending on how you want to administer it based on your jurisdiction's needs and ability. But we will share that out in the chat, so you have access to that. It's 4 questions. Who do you expect to use the ADU? How many square feet and how many bedrooms? What do you expect the monthly rent to be, and what utilities are paid by the tenant? So that just gives some baseline information about affordability, again, to help support, accurate information being collected as part of your APR, and eventually to support assumptions for your next RENA cycle. So I am going to turn it over to Thomas DeFranco from SANDAG to talk more about what data has been already collected in the region.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. So hi, everyone. Today I'm here to share a bit about how SANDAG is tracking and reporting ADUs through our housing policy and planning tool. And the goal of these tools is really to provide some regional insights into ADU data for policymakers and the public to utilize. The 2 products that I'm going to be mentioning today are the APR Housing Data Explorer and our ADU report. Both are found in the Housing Policy and Planning tool, and I'm going to include some links in the chat here so that you can follow along and explore the data on your own as well. Paul, if you can go to the next slide. So the first report that you'll see is a screenshot of our APR Data Explorer. Working with SANDAG's data science team, we were able to geospatially code every permitted unit submitted by the jurisdictions, by you all, in your annual progress reports since 2018. This tool can help you analyze at the regional level housing permitting data, and can help you compare ADU permitting trends to other structure types, as well as compare affordabilities. Next slide. One of the first trends which we see, which is probably not a surprise to any of you on this webinar, but the data shows that since 2018, most of our region's very low and low income permitted units have come from structures with 5 or more units. But additionally, you can see that ADUs, the ADU category, includes a high amount of moderate and a decent amount of very low and low income permitted units as well. Next slide, please. And then next, we have specifically our ADU report. So this report provides us a tool to analyze where ADUs are being permitted around the region, and it allows the public and policy leaders to gain useful insights into how the ADU policy that many of you are adopting is actually working to spur development. Next slide. Many of you specifically have programs within your housing elements to analyze and record your ADU progress or your ADU permitting progress. And you've communicated the need for data reports to provide during public meetings and to provide to decision makers when talking about ADUs. And this report is absolutely meant to support those efforts. It allows you to analyze what affordability levels are being permitted where, and allows jurisdictions to compare their production to surrounding cities and communities. I wanted to provide you some quick, interesting regional insights that we found through this ADU report. Next slide. So first, we can take a look at overall numbers. And overall, there have been 6,709 total ADUs permitted from 2018 to 2022. Obviously, this doesn't include the 2023 data yet. That's due in a couple of days, and we're absolutely going to have that data incorporated into this as well. But what you can see from 2018 to 2022 is that the city of San Diego, the county, and Encinitas round out the top 3 of units produced in the region. Next slide. Since 2018, we can see that the region went from permitting just under 500 units a year to over 2,000 units a year. And seeing that the year-over-year increases with jumps from 2018 to 2019, and then from 2020 to 2021, which indicates the strong growth of ADUs from a multitude of state and local policy changes that you all have had to implement. Next slide. Of these 6,700 units, about 5,900 of them, or 88%, are at the 80% area median income or higher, so of moderate or above moderate ADUs. And next slide. And as I previously said, because we geospatially coded each of these permits, we're able to create this own data set to see where we're actually building certain affordability, like different affordability, where we were able to see different affordability of each permitted unit. So here is an example of a regional affordability report where we take a look, where we can see that there are currently 11 jurisdictions reporting low and very low income ADUs, and it actually breaks it down specifically by census tract as well. Next slide. We can see this further breakdown by above moderate and moderate ADUs, where we see a lot of them, in all of the jurisdictions, but in especially the coastal region as well. Next slide. So we also built some heat maps that are able to compare neighborhoods within a city, like this heat map of the mid-cities and college area within the city of San Diego. Next slide. And then we're also able to see the difference within cities like East and West Chula Vista. Next slide. And you can also use it to compare neighboring cities with like this map, which shows a heat map of San Marcos and Escondido. So to conclude, the goal of all of these reports is to gain a more regionally aware effort on ADU planning, and feedback to how we can continue to build these reports to be more effective to the work you are doing is definitely welcome. And the last thing I just wanted to say, as with all this data, everyone here who's worked on an APR knows how difficult APRs can be. And so SANDAG wants to ensure that we're accurately displaying the data, we're displaying the data as accurately as possible. So we've included disclaimers which note the potential issues with APR data. I just wanted to make sure you were all aware that we're including that. And that concludes our presentation. I'll hand it off to Celeste from the Casita Coalition.
Great. Hi, everybody, and thanks for including us today. The Casita Coalition is a 501c3 nonprofit, and we also have members, and some of the categories of members are here. We're working to restore housing choice and variety in our neighborhoods through ADUs and other middle housing types. Our strategies include education, policy reform, narrative change, and coalition building. Next slide. So our founders began this work focusing on ADUs as they used existing resources and didn't add land costs, and they have multiple benefits to homeowners, renters, and to the community. Flexibility is key with ADUs, as folks on this call know. A single unit might serve multiple reasons and seasons as the years go on. So maintaining the flexibility of the ADU is key, and homeowners understand that. Next slide. So we modeled our work on innovative cities like Portland, Vancouver, Seattle, and went statewide with the reforms the Casita Coalition was part of authoring in 2017. Obviously, we all know that the majority of our land is zoned for single-family dwellings, so a strategy that can leverage the additional unused space in backyards and within homes has been critical to increase the number of houses that we have. Now, cities and states outside of California are modeling their work on Californians. Our success, as we all know, more than 85,000 ADUs, not including 2023. So our work ranges from local implementation, sharing out best practices from jurisdictions who are doing great work, to statewide legislation reform, to federal finance policy. This season in the legislature, we're supporting or sponsoring bills to optimize ADUs on multifamily properties, to encourage ADUs in the coastal zone, and to improve the existing unpermitted ADU amnesty programs allowances in state law. Next slide. So our narrative work is succeeding. We hear more and more about ADUs and their benefits to create affordable homes. Even at the federal level now, former HUD Secretary Marcia Fudge and others in the enterprises as well, Fannie and Freddie, all acknowledge the importance of ADUs and have modified their programs to tailor them more for ADUs. Next slide. So multiple studies show that ADUs are naturally more affordable than other traditional rental options, and they are more commonly built in areas with lower home values, lower rents, and income ranges by a wide range of types of homeowners. Next slide. However, the high cost of new detached ADU construction in particular is a barrier still to a lot of homeowners. So Casita Coalition works on removing barriers to more lower cost options, such as home sharing, which requires no renovation, just some help generally from a nonprofit. Junior ADUs, movable tiny homes on wheels, which are allowed in places throughout the state, but still have a lot of barriers to wider adoption. Manufactured homes are a great strategy for lower cost too. Next slide. And Casita Coalition also supports, as I said, middle housing options, everything from duplexes to quads to cottage courts to small scale multifamily. Each type has its own barriers, which Casita Coalition works on. Next slide. And just a hint of what's ahead, Portland's on the trail ahead of us, and they've had great success. Only 1 year after they passed a big housing reform package, fourplexes are now 76% of middle housing units, and middle housing units in general make up 42% of all permits. So that's pretty exciting. Also in the same period, 23% of ADUs were second ADUs on the lot. So this is where we're aimed at with our next reforms coming up for middle housing. Next slide. So as we've heard from others, AB 1033 is an exciting new opportunity for us to opt in and create a pipeline of more affordable starter homes. In the next slide, we'll show some examples of Portland projects and some of the steps to opting in that are important to remember. They've all been addressed by other presenters. I'll just say that awareness campaigns are a large part of what's going to be necessary, and updating all the materials to reflect the new opportunity. Next slide. And why would anyone do it and go to this extra expense? Well, even if families are the only occupants, 2 units on a property, there still may be good reasons to want to separate ownership and debt, or for a homeowner to want to sell a unit to eliminate debt on their primary home. Developers are creating these widely and able to do 2 and 3 units on a lot. All over, as I say, Texas, Portland, Oregon, New Jersey has an allowance, Washington State now does, British Columbia. It's being done a lot. Next slide. Here's a Portland project that was done recently, 2 ADUs on a lot behind a primary. And as you can see, much less expensive than the full-size traditional homes in the neighborhood. So super exciting. Next slide. Here's a story from a homeowner in Portland who did this and had a wonderful outcome, able to live without a mortgage and age in place successfully. Next slide. So we hosted a webinar in January on this topic, and one of our guests was Julie Alexander of Texas Condo Law. She's done more than 2,000 of these conversions, and kind of has it down to a science as to all the requirements involved. California law is going to be a little different, but here's some reasons why it's helping folks in Texas. Okay, next slide. Paul, thank you. So we have on our resources and guidebooks page a modeled local ordinance developed by Rubin, Junius, and Rose, a law firm, land use law firm. And we're sharing that out. So if local jurisdictions want a head start on some language for their ordinance, it's there for your use. They also have some ideas on recommendations, including this idea to offer the new ADU unit on the market for the first 45 days to folks who will will promise to be the owner occupant or an immediate family for jurisdictions that might want to prioritize that. Next slide. And the next few slides have some talking points. If you're speaking with elected officials or neighbors or anybody who might be trying to understand why this is important or why a jurisdiction should opt in, there's some talking points here. Next slide. Yeah, thousands of them are being done, and they are generally considerably more affordable than standalone options. Okay, next slide. And on our website, we have, you can watch that recording. The slide deck is there and some other resources. Okay, next slide. We also did a guidebook on pre-approved plan programs, which we're going to update based on the new law. But this couple next slides show some samples of things to think about if you're designing your program. Next slide. Napa Sonoma ADU Center has a very robust private vendor library of plans that have been pre-approved in their system, but by no means is it necessary to be this elaborate. City of LA just has a plain list that link to the plan owner's website. That's all that's required under AB 1332. Just having a library that's open to all. But these are some of the advantages of this type of pre-approved plan program that is now mandated. You get more variety, homeowners have more choice, liability stays with the designer, reduces planning staff hours in the development of your own plans. Next slide. Danville has some city-owned plans. They call their garden cottages, and advantages are here. Advantages are they can be very low cost, but I'll make a note here that we have heard from jurisdictions that you cannot omit the step of having a notice to people who might download the plans directly from the website that this does not mean they're ready to build, that they still need to get a building permit, because we have heard stories. So don't forget those warnings. And some other things to consider. The original architect's generally the only one who can legally make changes, and they will need regular updating. And you will take on liability. And next slide. So the previous presenters have covered this, what is mandated by the state law that must be developed. You can include your own plans if you've developed them locally or those that other cities have developed. Next slide. But one thing Casita Coalition is proud of working with the bill author to include is this provision to improve equity, which is that a previously approved plan that let's say a smaller ADU builder or designer might have had approved with a client in the system can now be reused if there aren't changes. So this will help those builders who don't have the resources to submit without a client to multiple jurisdictions. So we're pretty pleased about that. We hope it's simple to implement. So in the general arc of the ADU process, there are many steps. Pre-approved plans programs only will help with some of them. Homeowners need help with many of the others. There are many barriers, and we hope that you will consider how you might improve the process in its full range. Next slide. So I'm not going to cover the next slides in much detail. You can read our ADU best practices guidebook on our website to learn more. But these are some of the major barriers that homeowners face when they're building an ADU. Financing. These are some ideas to improve options for them, things you might want to provide in your local jurisdiction. We've made some progress, as I said, with federal finance. Awareness and messaging is key. Get out there in the community. City of San Diego did a fabulous job of outreach into the community and sent out people to give presentations all around. Make sure the community knows you have a culture of yes, so that they don't think of you as someone who's trying to stop them from building an ADU. Next slide. And then process improvements, the wonderful work on the local handbooks that other presenters have talked about, universal checklists, video tours of applications can be a great one to help break down the barriers and the challenge of looking at an application that might be overwhelming for some. Next slide. And cost of development. We hope that jurisdictions will consider how they can streamline or make more availability or just open the door to these lower cost and raise awareness around these lower cost additional living spaces options. Next slide. And here's our website with our resources. You can find legislative updates, join us on a variety of levels, be part of our peer-to-peer platforms and regular roundtables, and support our work removing barriers to ADUs, this important housing solution, as well as middle housing work is coming down the pike. All right, thanks.
All right. Well, we mostly have concluded our presentation portion of this webinar. We're going to start to transition over to a panel discussion with different members of local jurisdictions here in the San Diego region. We will have some invited panelists, but I do want to encourage you all to put any questions, comments, discussions in the chat, or as we get further into it, to chime in yourself. So I'd like to invite Dennis Howe from the County of San Diego, Melinda Dacey and Katie Ines from the City of Encinitas, Martin Reeder from the City of National City, Jeff Ryan from the City of San Diego, and Chris Stanley and Stacy Kurz from the City of Chula Vista, all up to answer a few questions. And I am going to start with Jeff Ryan from the City of San Diego. And Jeff has a few slides, but we've coordinated ahead of time. But really, my question for Jeff was kind of, how big of a factor are ADUs in the overall production of housing in the city of San Diego, and how's ADU production looking this year? So I'll turn it over to you, Jeff.
Thanks, Matt. I appreciate it. So obviously ADUs are a huge deal in everyone's jurisdiction, and that's certainly true for the city of San Diego. I just wanted to give you guys just kind of a brief understanding of kind of the scale at which ADUs are and what role they play in our housing landscape and how they've increased just over time, over the past few years. Next slide. So this year and this year's APR, we're going to be reporting 1,908 ADUs that received building permit issuances in 2023 alone. This constitutes about 20% of our total housing production this year. Obviously, this is a fairly large component of it. We're not at 40% like in Portland, like was previously reported, but 20% is a pretty sizable number. The vast majority of remaining housing is coming from multifamily, but 20% is, in my view, a good number. Of those, about 89 were deed restricted, a vast majority of which are deed restricted at the moderate income level. And a lot of that is because we have a fairly unique program in San Diego called the ADU Density Bonus Program. Next slide. Just a quick reminder, the ADU Density Bonus Program allows for every market rate, every restricted affordable accessory dwelling unit, you're allowed a bonus accessory dwelling unit. There's theoretically no limit, but you still have to comply with floor area ratio and lot coverage of the base zone. And what that means, though, is that you can get 4 or 5 ADUs now on a single family lot, and that allows you to be able to kind of gives you a lot more flexibility in being able to build ADUs at a higher scale. Next slide. And just kind of a quick overview. When the program was first introduced and kind of standing up, only about 3% of all ADUs were built through the ADU Density Bonus Program, and then it increased to 5%, and now we're seeing about 8% of all of our ADUs are built through this program. And it's been fairly successful, actually, in terms of having a good ratio of affordable units to market rate. I think this year we're about slightly over 50%. We're at 54% of all accessory dwelling units built through the ADU bonus program are in fact deed restricted. That pretty much concludes my slide. I just want to kind of give you a quick overview of how that's kind of impacted us. But we found that the ADU density bonus program is an increasingly popular and important part of our ADU landscape.
Thank you, Jeff, for that overview of ADUs and preview of the 2023 APR data. I think you can go ahead and end the slideshow, Paul, and we'll all continue on with the panel discussion. Sticking on the topic of production, I was going to go to the City of Encinitas, Katie and Melinda, and hear a little bit from you all about how things are going in Encinitas. As we looked at some of the numbers that Thomas was sharing, Encinitas was pretty high on the list of production relative to jurisdictions in the region, but obviously much smaller than the 2 jurisdictions in the top of the list, the county and the city of San Diego. So my question for you is, what has made ADU development attractive in Encinitas and successful to get so much production relative to the population?
Thank you, Matt. I think part of it was when the city was initially looking to adopt our local ADU ordinance, that we did have a pretty robust public outreach process. So sort of garnered some interest from members of the public, presented the various state laws and requirements to city council to kind of get it on their radar. And as part of that, our city council actually has waived permit fees for accessory dwelling units. And I think that is part of the reason why we've seen such an interest in ADUs coming through the city, because, property owners realized with the conversations that were happening in the community that they wouldn't have to pay their permit fees.
Anything to add, Melinda?
I would add that, we also do some marketing around our Pradu program and our pre-approved ADU plans. We send out quarterly notifications to the community through our city council newsletter, as well as through an interested parties list that we have regarding ADU production, utilizing constant contact distribution program. I don't know, Paul or Matt, if you want me to kind of talk about the ADU survey process that we do as well.
Let's come back to that later.
Okay.
I know you guys are kind of on the cutting edge, so I do want to get to that. But I want to get some of the other jurisdictions involved in the conversation as well. So I was going to go to National City next and have a question for you, Martin. City of National City opted to work with SANDAG through the HAP TA program to develop a handbook for kind of counter staff to administer and promote ADU development in the city. I'm wondering if you can describe a little bit about why the city chose to prepare a handbook and what kind of issues you were looking to solve by developing that.
Sure. Thanks, Matt, and good afternoon, everyone. Martin Reeder. I'm here at the City of National City. So we are a very small city, as most of you know. We have a pretty small population, but we have an even smaller city hall. But that being said, we have very particular rules and regulations in each of the departments. And, with departmentalization at times, sometimes it's difficult for a customer to come in and find out all of their information in one trip. We do our best to facilitate that, but we found that the manual is the best option for us to get all of that important information in one spot, and also to continue to offer over-the-counter discussions with our fire department and engineering department, especially. Somebody mentioned earlier about the addressing for the City of National City. That's been a bit of a sticking point. Obviously, when a new water meter might be required, if you don't need new sprinklers for a unit, for example. We have a lot of longer, deep lots in the city, so sometimes, even though sprinklers wouldn't otherwise be allowed because the property is so far from the street, or the ADU would be so far from the street, we bump into a few issues with that. But the fire department has some obviously pretty important regulations, so we wanted to make sure those, among others, are put in one place. So we've really enjoyed the process of getting that together. It's allowed the city departments to talk together more freely and come up with what those sticking points are, and so we're all more knowledgeable for it, as well as the end user, which of course is the most important part.
Good. Well, thank you, and hopefully it saves you a little bit of headache dealing with customers at the counter. Dennis, how about at the county? Can you describe a little bit about the handbook we prepared under the HAP program, and what kind of barriers you're facing in the county related to ADU development?
Yeah, so we're still in the process on ours. I know some of it was shared today, and we greatly appreciate the efforts that are being put forth by the team. They're very patient with us as we make adjustments and restate little tiny details that we'd like to have changed, not questioning why it's important so much as helping us help the customers, because the resource itself is meant for the customers that don't have necessarily a professional or someone that knows the process, because we have so many different applicants that come into the county. And our goal is to help those people that don't have an architect or an engineer, or maybe are using our pre-approved plans because they're trying to just save some money and get through the process. And there's a lot of different pieces that go into it. We have multiple fire authorities that have to review, and they all have a different approach. So it's not like we can give out a checklist of this is what you would need to do for each one of the fire approvals that are outside agencies. And this itself helps to explain things like the septic. That was one of the pieces we just spent a lot of time on. And we're actually expanding a little bit more because it's such a project stopping item that may not be apparent to customers. And we don't want them to spend a lot of money paying a designer and going down the path of preparing plans to find out that they can't do anything. So that's a lot of what we've been facing with the handbook. And I really look forward to seeing the final piece and being able to hand it out to folks. It's going to be very helpful and giving more tools to those people. It's not to say that we don't want to help people in the lobby, but for every person that we can help outside of that lobby, we can help somebody else with another effort and get other housing on the market as well. So that's been our experience with the handbook. And ADUs in general have just had a flux because we had a pre-approved, or we have pre-approved plans, but we also had a fee waiver for impact fees that the county controlled that was a sunsetting fee waiver that ended on January 9th of 2024, and it was 5 years. So we did see a heavy influx as that was getting ready to end and no longer be funded. There was a lot of people that were really trying to get plans in, trying to get permits issued, and just pushing through. But we've also noticed that after the program ended, we're still now seeing similar monthly totals that we saw prior to the fee waiver. So there's a healthy growth in the ADU market still.
Dennis, any talk of extending the fee waiver program for the county, or not at this time?
That is really in the hands of the board and a lot of the funding that's available. So I don't have much of that on my side. I know it's if we have something to fund it, because although we're waiving fees, we're still cost recovery. So those fees and impacts are still being covered. They were just being covered through monies being allocated by the board.
All right. Well, thank you, Dennis. Let's turn to National City. Brian Warwick is also joining us from the city. I did not introduce him. So hello, Brian, Chris, and Stacy. What are the challenges you all are facing related to ADU production, and what's going well down in Chula Vista?
And you want to speak to the loan program for productions?
Sure. Brian Warwick, City of Chula Vista. We have a ADU loan program that we've been doing on a pilot basis, but it's been kind of a iterative process to figure out the best way to do it, because it's been challenging, to be honest. There's been a lot of interest, but then people turn out to not qualify, or they don't follow up. So it's important to cast a wide net, certainly when doing these programs. And one of the lessons learned for us is to not have the terms be overly restrictive. We started out with affordability requirement of low income for both the homeowner and the tenant, and a 30-year reg agreement, and that was just too onerous. So we reduced it to 15 years, and the homeowner could be moderate income, and it seems to more people can qualify that way. And just for that kind of thing, construction management and project management is important. These are people who haven't built ADUs before, and the city's, getting involved with issuing loans. So, we're having to be very hands-on with them.
So these would be low interest or no interest loans? Yeah,
exactly. A soft loan that is forgiven after 30 years. at the end of the term.
So you're having trouble giving money away to get ADUs built.
Well, the other challenge is that we set a maximum loan amount of $100,000, but most ADUs cost well over that. So if you're a low-income homeowner, you don't necessarily have an extra $100,000 to finish the job. So we've kind of pivoted somewhat to also allowing loans to go towards repair of existing unpermitted ADUs to bring them into compliance with building code, because that will be a smaller cost, a smaller scope, and it's sort of a known universe, at least for some of the ones that have requested a stay of enforcement pursuant to the state law. So we can reach out to those homeowners.
Okay. Well, I think you touched on two of the things I wanted to focus on during this discussion was money and technical know-how, which seemed to me to be two of the biggest barriers to getting ADUs built. You have to have a chunk of change to start the process, and you need someone you trust and is qualified to site and get a building permit and start building. Let's start with the money side of things. What is everyone doing throughout the region to help address the funding issue? We talked about waiver of fees. You've got a loan program. As far as I could tell, I know the city of San Diego does some work through the Housing Commission for some financing options for ADUs. And then noted on Encinitas, Chula Vista, and the county related to fees. Is anyone else doing loan programs or anything to incentivize on the financial side for ADUs? This is for our panel primarily, but if anyone else on the webinar is doing things, we'd love to hear about that too.
Yeah, Matt, this is Martin with National City again. So our council has given us direction to pursue public local housing authority money, or we have that money that we're going to be using, or we are getting a grant program together to have low interest loans to people wishing to construct ADUs that need help with that. And in return, we're looking for affordability of rent for the life of that loan. So that's something we're actively working towards, as well as pre-approved plans with that money.
Great. Anybody else have anything innovative or unique they're doing related to financing? All right. Well, I think kind of the related topic is fees. We've heard a little bit about fee waivers, but also kind of the impact of production of ADUs relative to infrastructure, on the character of neighborhoods, on impacting parking supply. Jeff, I know you have mentioned that there are some changes the city has made to the ADU bonus program in response to feedback. I'm wondering if you could share a little bit about what those changes are and why the city pursued those.
Yeah, so we take a pretty aggressive approach to our ADU program, and we've had to make some modifications. For example, HCD told us that we were perhaps being too pro-housing in some regards, and we were actually required to amend our ADU code regarding JADUs. We were allowing JADUs to be detached garages. We said, yeah, sure, that could be a JADU, why not? And the state was like, oh, no, that's a little too above and beyond what we wanted. So that was an interesting experience that we had to revise our code to walk back that benefit a little bit. Another way that we have amended our program is we also created an accessible ADU program where if you have like an affordable deed restricted unit and you make one of those units also handicapped accessible, you can also get an additional market rate unit as a way to encourage the development of more accessible ADUs in our system.
All right, thank you. What about some of the other barriers? I've heard a lot of them today from our presentations and through our discussion so far. We heard some about utility connections, interdepartmental coordination. I haven't heard much about the Coastal Commission today. Is that seen as a barrier to you all? And what changes are you all anticipating relative to working with the Coastal Commission? What works for working with the Coastal Commission? Maybe we'll cast it in a positive light like that. Anybody have any good stories to share for working with the Coastal Commission on ADUs?
Melinda, Daisy here, City of Encinitas. I'll hop in a little bit on this one and Katie can jump in as well. The city has been processing ADU ordinance updates and had an agreement with Coastal Commission to kind of come back with a replacement parking requirement when we do have a loss of parking within a certain distance of all of our beach access points. So we have kind of a verbal agreement with them at this point from specific beach access points that replacement parking will be required within a quarter-mile walking distance of those beach access points. So when we had submitted our ADU ordinance to them, the Coastal Commission required that the city do a parking study to determine the impacts of the parking loss with beach access and coastal access. And they have also required us to process coastal development permits for the ADUs within the coastal zone. And so that's something that the city hadn't been doing, but we are doing now moving forward based on that direction. And Katie can kind of talk about that process and how that works at the city.
Sure, thanks, Melinda. So in terms of coastal development permits being required now for accessory dwelling units, what we did to sort of help streamline that process was to come up with sort of a more abbreviated or shortened staff report template where the planners could complete their review of the CDP for the accessory dwelling unit, and they would essentially just be able to fill in this very shortened staff report. We included boilerplate language for the findings for the CDP and also the CEQA exemption, just to kind of help streamline that process, keeping in mind sort of the 60-day review timelines where they needed to go through the ADU CDP process and the building permit process in that 60-day time frame. So as much as we could to kind of make that process quick and easy and simple for our planners, that's what we've been trying to do.
Thank you very much for sharing a little bit about your experience. Anybody else have anything to share on Coastal Commission?
Matt, this is
Yes.
Amanda Lee with City of Del Mar.
Hi, Amanda.
And hi, how's everyone doing? Sorry, I don't have my video on, multitasking here. But we share the experience with Encinitas in terms of that was new to us to have CDPs required for every single ADU, but we are doing that now. But I would say that we consider Coastal Commission to be an important partner in this. It's really important that these Coastal Act protections for environmental resources apply, because otherwise the government code has really been a housing at all costs, and that really conflicts with our certified LCP otherwise. So it has been working out. We're jurisdiction where money really isn't a barrier for the property owners here. So we're seeing strong production. And in fact, that's how we've met already very early in the cycle, our above moderate and moderate categories. So we've instead created incentive programs to try and encourage people to dedicate units and create them for lower income households. So that's really the emphasis that we're putting. But Coastal Commission has been a good partner, and right now they're reviewing our ADU ordinance for certification.
Amanda, can you tell us a little bit more about what those incentives look like?
So it's really bonus units and some additional. We've also wrapped it into an ADU amnesty program where if it's going to be a lower income unit, it would be full waiver of fees for processing. So to try and get some of those known units that are out there to come in, and then a partial waiver of fees for moderate income units. We haven't had any interest yet. And then really where we're hoping to gain some interest is in multi-unit developments. We do have a lot of older apartment complexes. So for them to be able to add some new market rate units in exchange for deed restricting some of their older existing apartments. We're hoping to get some participation there.
Thank you for jumping in and sharing. Appreciate it. I was going to turn next to some of the recent state laws we covered today. Is anybody's jurisdiction planning or exploring opting into AB 1033 for separate sale and conveyance?
This is Martin with National City. So that's something that's come up quite a bit. We are looking into that still, but at the direction again of our city council, we're looking for affordable ownership in as many ways as we can, and obviously that's a very challenging thing to come up with without when you're dealing with private properties. Obviously, on city properties, we have opportunities for that potentially. But through that process, if it indeed works out for the city, which we're hoping to finish exploring that this year, that would definitely be an opportunity for us to do so.
Great, glad to hear there's some interest. Melinda, anything in Encinitas?
Yeah, in Encinitas, there's a little bit of interest from the public to do that bill. And so we will be taking a future council item to the city council for their consideration on if they want to opt into the bill. And we'll see how it goes from there. We get some direction to incorporate some affordability requirements into that. We may end up going that route.
What about Chula Vista, City of San Diego, or the county? Any talks on 1033?
We're thinking about it. There's not really any direction yet. It's all tentative right now, but it's certainly, I mean, we get tons of questions about it, and there's certainly a lot of public interest, but we just nothing definite right now if we're going to pursue it.
Chris, I saw you come off mute.
Yeah, so
Dad.
Yeah, I'm not aware of any questions or anything from the public, but I know internally we have discussed it and we're looking into it. I think for us, we may still be at the portion where we're trying to make sure if how to handle it internally, or that we all agree, because it would potentially be more work. I think some of our departments have a decent amount of work. So again, internal discussions, and I think we've had some questions about it from council.
Great. Dennis, did you want to add anything, or Brian?
I just know our county's always looking into all the options that we have. So I think right now long range planning is working through that and determining what options to present and how to look at it, how it would affect our customers and our constituents.
Yeah,
Brian,
I would
did
just
you want to add? Go ahead.
I think the main concern about staff capacity is on the condo mapping, since that division is already kind of backed up with other work. So,
okay. Well, I think the last topic I wanted to cover as part of this discussion was pre-approved ADU plans, and I think a question for the group of how well do they work and what gaps do they leave will be my starting question. Who's seeing success and take on their pre-approved plans? Dennis, you want to go first?
Just to share with everybody, the County of San Diego has 6 sets of pre-approved plans. 3 of them are 1,200 square foot. 1 is 1,000, 1 is 800, and 1 is 600. Our goal from the very beginning had been we did a lot of research, and we found that a lot of the failed pre-approved type processes tried to get too much into customization or options. And our customers we were really trying to help with pre-approved plans were those that didn't have the money or time to go to an architect, maybe wanted to get a designer and wanted something. Our plans are not fancy. They're very simple and very straightforward. And that has helped us a lot when it comes to the updating every 3 code cycles. I think we've been through 2 code cycles now with all of them, and it hasn't had a lot of effort because of the way that we put it together. And so we've had, I think I shared with you that we were doing like 300 or 400 ADUs a year in the last few years. Of the 4 to 5 years that we've had the plans, we've only had a little over 100 used. But the other thing we looked at was that the sets of plans were also used as a guide for what could be done with any set of building and construction plans. And so people understood what we were looking for and what a plan looked like that was fully completed, minus roof framing, foundations, and site plan, plot plans. So that's what we really saw as a benefit. We didn't tie it to an architect or an engineering company only because we didn't want to have to deal with the legality of reusing their plans every time the code cycle changed. And we tried to keep it really simple and keep it to the point at which you can use parts of the building code for homeowners and residents that can design their own home for single family dwellings. And that allowed us to stay away from registered professionals.
So when you're saying we, it's literally we at the county. It's not
Yes.
under contract to an architect. It's something you maintain and administer in-house, which I think is unique relative to ADU pre-approved plans in the state. Yeah.
One thing we've always done is made them a free and available in CAD format on our website to anyone, including anyone in this room that wants to use them. And we'll give you everything you need to just change the moniker from the County of San Diego to whatever jurisdiction you are, because we don't see the point in holding on to it. And again, it doesn't have a specific designer to it, so no one needs to be consulted. So
That's great. Katie and Melinda, Encinitas has had a pre-approved program for quite a while now. What successes have you found, and what are the challenges that you still face?
Yeah, thanks, Matt. So we took a little bit of a different approach than Dennis did, and we released an RFP to solicit interest from, various architects who maybe would want to create the pre-approved plans. And we selected 2 different local architects who are familiar with our process. And we have been using their pre-approved plans for quite some time. We kind of looked at, 2 different architects that had different variations to give property owners different choices. And one kind of unique thing that one of the architects did was created plans that would facilitate additions to be added in the future to an ADU. So if you had a 1-bedroom, then she had a plan that maybe you could add another bedroom in the future, just to kind of give some flexibility. And then one thing that we found kind of going through the building code update was that often property owners would ask for a reverse floor plan. So we added the reverse floor plan just to kind of help give more options for physically siting the ADUs on different properties, and found that that was helpful. I think one thing that maybe has been a challenge is related to, and I think other folks have touched on it, property owners who have not gone through the process before, not realizing that they needed specific site planning, topography, all of the things that are not part of the pre-approved process. And so sort of to help with that, we came up with a submittal checklist, worked with engineering, building, fire, so that they were aware of the various requirements, that it wasn't just, hey, we're grabbing these plans from the website and we're able to use them.
Thank you. Jeff, I have a question for you. The city of San Diego is kind of one of, I think, the only jurisdictions I've seen that has something that looks like a program for pre-approved ADU plans. And by that, I mean, the city of San Diego links to the county's pre-approved plans and Encinitas's pre-approved plans. Do people use those when they come into the city of San Diego? Is that a common thing that you see?
I wish I could be able to answer that question. I don't really work directly with the team that actually reviews projects. I mostly just work on policy issues. But yeah, so I wish I knew the answer to that question, but I do know that we do take pre-approved plans from other jurisdictions.
Do you take them from beyond other jurisdictions, do you know, or not sure?
I can answer that question.
Okay.
Sorry.
Well, I guess moving on, anybody else have anything to share about developing pre-approved ADU plans, successes or challenges in doing that from an agency standpoint?
I guess I would just add, if you're going to go that route, I guess we don't really have to anymore, it sounds like, with the new update, but we were already in the process of doing that, and it took a lot longer, I think, than we expected, or it's taking a lot longer, I should say. I think we originally were expecting them to be completed in September, and then we extended the agreement to December, and then we extended it till the end of the month. And I think I got the plans on Friday for our pre-approved plans. We have 12 versions, really 6, but kind of, I think Katie was mentioning it. We did reverse versions as well. Yeah, so just a lot of back and forth. I mean, I think we went through 5 review cycles. We're in like 2 climate zones, I guess, and has to do with building. I'm not going to pretend like I know too much about it, but we had to think about that and add that into it, and added a lot of options. So yeah, again, if someone's going to be looking into that, I would just say be aware it's probably going to take a lot longer maybe than you hope or expect. I guess I could talk a little bit about Symbian. I don't know if anybody's aware of that, but that's a system that we looked into. Where basically members of the public can type in their address, and then it'll pull up their property, will show their house, and then once these pre-approved plans, once we get them up on Symbian, basically they can choose them, and it'll show like an outline of the ADU plans on the property, and kind of show you if you can or cannot, if they'll fit on the site. So that's kind of an interesting tool. But again, since we're not done yet, we haven't really had it open to the public. So that's something that we're interested to see. That's helpful. Hardship to that specifically is, for whatever reason, like half of the east portion of our city is kind of where actually our newer development is. And they have what we call SPA plans. What is that? Specific planning areas. And they're kind of like little mini specific plans. And for whatever reason, that data is not like being inputted correctly. So I'm gonna have to work with Symbian on that, but that'll obviously be an issue of half our city it's not gonna work at. So yeah, just a lot of time to look into this. Stacey, you want to add something?
I'm popping on real fast. The other thing about Symbian is that it's quite expensive. So it's about $20,000 per year to not only just set it up, but maintain it. And so, you know, luckily we have the SANDAG HAP grant to help us out with all of that. But I think as a jurisdiction, you know, maintaining that's going to become difficult if it's not being utilized very much.
Well, I think Celeste also put in a good comment in the chat that pre-approved plans, and I think kind of Symbian goes along with this, is kind of about marketing and awareness to some degree, and promoting ADUs in general. So even if there isn't a direct link to uptake on the pre-approved plans, you know, it still does promote interest and hopefully production overall. I don't know if you wanted to add or expand on that, Celeste.
Yeah, I think there's been a lot of learning since the earliest days of pre-approved plan sets that cities would develop when there wasn't a lot of variety and maybe local research wasn't done as to the need. But I think we've, come a ways since then, so that people are getting finally some more traction. And also understanding that some homeowners will be moving into the ADU and are going to be a little more demanding on customization, whereas others are looking for a rental and they're more open to a more of a basic design. So I think it really is important, though, because it does help the community understand that the jurisdiction really wants them to build ADUs. So that's super helpful.
Hey, everybody, just a quick update from the city of Vista. My name is Joe Vaca. I'm the Director of Community Development here. And
Hi, Joe.
Hi, how's it going?
Good. Keep on going, please.
So very fortunate to work with the proactive staff here and a supportive city council. Last night, we had an ordinance adopted by our council to amend our accessory dwelling unit regulations to allow a maximum of 3-bedroom ADUs. And then we've also been collaborating with Michael Cassidy, which is a senior civil engineer with the County of San Diego, Dennis, and he had indicated that we can use the plans also. So we're definitely going to be collaborating with you. We appreciate you making those available for our use. We indicated to the city council that we plan to use those 6 plan types that the county has available. So they were excited about that. And then we're also going to work with our housing team. Eric Bunge's on the the Zoom today to have 4 additional plan types created as standard plans for the city of Vista to provide more variety. We're going to do a studio, a 2-bedroom, 1-bath, and a 2-bedroom, 2-bath. And those would be 500 square feet and both approximately 750, so they could try to utilize the fee waivers. And then we want to do a 3-bedroom, 2-bath, 1,194 square foot ADU, so that could accommodate a family. So we're going to be working on that in the next few months. And the most of our council was supportive. And if you want a media update, it was on Fox 5 News. So it was interesting. But we're doing a good job here. We have really good planning staff. They're going to kind of hit the ground running pretty soon after this presentation to kind of incorporate some updates to our website for ADU regulations and get the word out there in collaboration with our housing staff, who also does a great job. So
thanks for jumping in, Joe, and sharing some updates from Vista. And yeah, congratulations on your milestone, and wish you success as you take on a challenging pre-approved ADU development process. So look forward to seeing what comes out of that. Dennis, I think you raised your hand. I know there's a question in the chat from Priscilla as well addressed to you.
Yeah, I can probably handle the 2 things if I have a second. One thing that Lessons shared was we created our plans based off of interest at the time we had them, and the 1,200 heavy side was because at the time there were no fee waivers or impact fee waivers set forth by the state. And so after the laws changed and it became something where if you're under 750 square feet, impact fees don't apply, we really looked back at the fact that we would have probably put a little bit more effort into maybe having a couple of options under 750 square feet, maybe closer to 750 and then 2 at 600. But we hadn't done that, and essentially we'd already invested a lot of time into creating what we had. The other thing we didn't do was connect garages to any of them, because that orients them in space on where they can be used on plans. So that was something else. If you're thinking about what to do, by creating it with a garage, you kind of force a direction to the unit. And then the question that had come up was essentially, how do we control changes? We have a pre-intake process for completeness before things are submitted, and the pre-approved plans have to go through that process as well. So we have engineers and we have planning staff looking at each of the things to make sure they're complete and make sure they didn't change too much. Because again, yes, you could download the plans and adjust where windows and doors are and not tell us. But our staff are pretty well versed in what our plans look like. And so if something changes, we have the conversation. If you let us know, we can review it quickly. As long as it's a minor change, that's the benefit of using a braced wall system, is you can shift them around as long as they meet certain requirements. The piece about the Title 24 and the energy calculations, a lot of times the 3 things we did not provide were a plot plan that describes how you were going to handle where the building went. The roof framing needs to be done by a truss engineering company, so it's a stamped and submitted set to us. And then the energy calculations, because we actually cover 4 different climate zones and didn't want to limit the options of our customers, because we could run each one in 4 different directions and provide a restrictive set of use this water heater, use these windows, you do all of this. But we looked at the cost of getting a good energy consultant was roughly about $500 at the time. And that person could probably save the homeowner that much money just in specifying exactly what they wanted and what would work for them. And it reduced how many plan changes we had, because then people weren't asking us to switch out windows or make minor adjustments to the plans due to Title 24 issues.
All right. Well, I think safe to say one of the conclusions of pre-approved plans is there's still some work to do to get them built on a lot. We are getting close to the end of our scheduled time. So maybe we'll just end with a chance for anyone on our panel or any of our speakers to share any final thoughts on ADUs. If you had a magic wand to make more ADUs in your jurisdiction, what would you use it for? Anyone? Anyone want the magic wand? Jeff?
If I had a magic wand, I would probably wave my wand and not actually try to build accessory dwelling units and just try to build more just dedicated missing middle. In my view, like a single family house with a couple of ADUs would be, you know, what's if I'm waving a magic wand, to me, the better outcome is 8 townhomes instead of a single house and a couple of ADUs. That's my magic wand.
Good use of your magic wand. Thank you, Jeff. Anybody else? Martin?
Sure, I think we would just probably wave the magic wand and get more staff so we can get this done, because we've been having a lot of conversations at the counter with people about wanting to have approved plans, and it's definitely something that we want to, you know, give a good look at to, you know, see if it's something that we can do through our third-party plan reviewing company, which offers that service, or if we're going to utilize one of the some of the pre-approved plans with some of the other jurisdictions. But getting that done sooner than later was good, because the longer we wait, the more ADU laws come down the pike, and you know how that is.
Yep. That's why we're here today. Let's try and keep up. How about Chula Vista? Brian, Chris, Stacy, anything you'd like to conclude with?
Maybe Brian can speak to this better, but obviously with the ADU loan program, what did we have? We had two $100,000 loans that we had to do, Brian. Is that right?
The pilot program has $200,000, which we haven't yet allocated. So we're still screening applicants and dealing with that. So that gives you a sense of how challenging that can be. San Diego's, we've been taken to calling it their infinite ADU program is definitely intriguing. I don't know if there's the political appetite to adopt it in Chula Vista, but definitely seems like it moves the needle.
Yeah. And how about you, Katie and Melinda?
Gosh, it's so much power with the magic wand. I think for us, it would probably have to be, or at least for me, I don't want to speak for Melinda, but just making the tracking of the units easier, which would result in having a streamlined reporting process for the APR. We've had some efforts here in Encinitas. We have a housing tracking form that all of our housing development projects submit to us. And we've been putting that data into our permitting tracking system, but it's not quite perfected. So I think if I had a magic wand, I would want to perfect that process to make the APR reporting just much easier on staff and everybody involved.
Second one Katie said, just all the state changes, even to the APR reporting, it's hard to get our permitting software updated to even keep up with those changes as well. So we're always like 2 steps behind, it feels like, I'm trying to keep up.
Well, thank you for squeezing in a quick plug on your ADU tracking and affordability tracking for ADUs. I promised to come back to that and got distracted with our other topics, but we did talk about this. Other things I'll note is you do it quarterly, which is not typical as far as I know. You do regularly track affordability, which I'm not sure everyone's doing. And so while you're saying you're a couple steps behind, I think you're actually a couple steps ahead of most other jurisdictions, despite the challenges you still face. Anything you wanted to add about the affordability tracking before we wrap up here?
Yeah, I mean, I'll add that, you know, one of our housing element programs is to do a biennial. So every 2 years, we're supposed to survey how our ADU production has been going in relation to meeting our RENA allocation. And that whole process, we do the housing development tracking form at permitting submittal to the city. And when we are going through the process to do the survey, we just pull the data from our permitting software and send out a survey that was to drop it off or fill it out online and provide us with just updated information on what the units are actually being rented at. because at the time of application, sometimes they just don't know. And so they just check a box to make sure that they can get their documentation submitted to us. So there's some follow-up with that and updating the APRs and submitting those back to HCD with the updated information for what the units are being rented at.
Thank you for sharing. We are at 2 o'clock. Paul, can you bring back up the slide deck? We've just got a couple other slides on some announcements to close out our program today. So looking forward, do want to let you know to keep an eye out for an upcoming training on land value capture through the SANDAG HAP TA program. That will be in April, late April or early May. We do have a number of technical resources that are about to be released, SB 423. We have our 1332 and 1033 release. So look for that up on the website, along with some recordings and presentations from previous trainings that we've done. SANDAG also recently published their anti-displacement strategy website. So you can keep take a look at that at the link in the chat and on the screen here. So that's some of the next steps to look forward to on the HAP TA program. Lastly, we do have a survey that is live just to get your feedback on the HAP TA program. If you have a couple seconds to give us some feedback on how effective the trainings have been, and perhaps more importantly, how to structure trainings and what topics to address going forward. We'd love to hear that. We want to respond to your needs. So this is one of the ways we can keep up with you and respond to those needs. So I think that's it. Anything else to wrap up with, Carrie?
No, just thank you all so much for joining us and being part of the discussion. I'll be sending all these slides out and the recordings and all the materials that we've shared, and really appreciate everybody's attendance. And
yeah, thank you, Ian, Aaron, Thomas, Celeste, and Adam, our speakers, as well as our panelists, Dennis, Katie and Melinda, Martin, Jeff, Chris, Stacy, and who did I forget? Brian? Yes, thank you. All right. Well, thank you everyone for spending your time with us today, this afternoon. Appreciate it.
Thank you.